The summer of 1962 was a quiet one in Rapid City, South Dakota. Nestled in the Black Hills, it was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and knew their neighbors by name. John Bowman was a man many in the community knew, a car salesman, a father of three, and by most accounts, a hardworking and steady family man. Yet behind closed doors, Bowman had a documented history of psychiatric issues, including prior hospitalizations, painting a far more complicated picture than the one seen by neighbors and colleagues. But behind the quiet routines and familiar smiles, something was unraveling inside the Bowman household, something that no one in the neighborhood seemed to see coming. This is the Bowman family tragedy. True crime in Rapid City. Hey everybody, this is Kenna, and today I'm in Mount Calvary Cemetery, and I'm here to bring you a story. And this one is not a flood story this time. This is a true crime story, and it involves this family here. The Bowmans. Now, this is a very tragic story. These are the parents, John and Alberta. And over here are their three sons, Bruce, Jack, and Maury. So this happened one weekend in July of 1962, right here in Rapid. And I'm going to have to be careful telling this story because YouTube doesn't like this kind of story. So I'm going to have to use code words, because then the algorithm will think that I'm trying to hurt myself or something. But I will say it's an unaliving, self-deletion kind of story. So I will be taking you to important sites of the story. I'm going to take you to where John Bowman worked as an auto salesman, and the church where they all worshipped, and where the boys went to Catholic school. And then finally I'll take you to their house where all this happened. I'll give you a little backstory on all the members of the family. So let's do that first. Let's go. John Cleo Bowman was born in 1903, one of 6 children. His parents, John Chandler and Leah Goffnor Bowman, moved the family often during his early years, eventually settling in Lake City, South Dakota, when John was 10.
He graduated from Lake City High School and later attended Coyne Electric College in Chicago. After a few years working in electronics, John moved to Rapid City around 1933. Soon after, he began working at Black Hills Olds Cadillac, where he would spend nearly 3 decades, becoming one of the dealership's top salesmen. Alberta Connolly was born in 1913 in Strupp, South Dakota, the third of 6 children born to Peter and Mary Connolly. She grew up during the Great Depression in a family that struggled with deep poverty. The Connollys were tenant workers on various cattle ranches in the southeastern part of the state, living a hard, uncertain life on the plains. Eventually, Alberta made her way west to the Rapid City area. We don't know exactly when or how John and Alberta first met, but less than 4 years after his arrival in Rapid City, they were married in 1937. Something had clearly drawn them together. It's likely Alberta had no idea what John was dealing with beneath the surface. In the 30s, mental illness was rarely spoken of, and John himself may not have fully understood it. Back then, the field of psychiatry was just beginning to experiment with radical treatments like electric shock therapy and lobotomies. But John never received those. Whatever pain he carried was masked by charm, professionalism, and steady success. The couple's first child, John Connolly Bowman, known as Jack, was born on June 14, 1938 in Rapid City. By the summer of 1962, Jack was 24 years old. He had just returned to college in Minnesota the night before the tragedy. The next day, he would be called back to a home and a life forever changed. The couple's second son, Bruce Bernard Michael, was born on October 24, 1943. He was 18 years old at the time of his death. Bruce had attended both Cathedral High School and briefly Central High, but eventually dropped out. Like his mother, Bruce struggled with alcohol, and by the early 60s he seemed adrift, a young man searching for direction in a world that offered few answers. Maurice Donald Bowman, known to family and friends as Maury, was born on August 13, 1945. He was just shy of his 17th birthday when his life was cut short. A student at Cathedral High School, Maury was athletic and involved in football and other sports, but beneath his quiet strength was a sensitive, thoughtful young man, someone who, by all accounts, felt things deeply and kept much of it to himself.
All right, here we are, downtown Rapid City. We'll start off by saying I'm getting most of my information on this case from the book Death on St. Charles Street by reporter Joe Strupp. Now, Joe was the great nephew of Alberta Bowman. Now, he was born after she died, so he never knew her. But a lot of my information comes from his book. So, over here, in that building over there, that was the Oldsmobile Cadillac dealership back in the 30s and 40s, all the way up to 1967. It is now called Hay Camp Brewery. But there's one thing that kind of puzzles me, because I checked on ChatGPT and also Google, and it said this building was not built until 1948. It was just an empty lot before then. So I'm not quite sure, but Joe Strupp says that shortly after John Bowman moved to Rapid City in 1933, he started working here at Black Hills Oldsmobile Cadillac. But according to my records, that's impossible because it didn't exist. This building didn't exist back then. So he may have worked for another dealership in this area. But anyway, yeah. We're gonna go over here and look at it. Now, John Bowman was a very successful auto salesman and mechanic. Okay, we had to take a brief pause because someone, we won't mention names, had to take a poop, okay? As always. Anyway, this is Hay Camp Brewery, formerly Black Hills Oldsmobile until 1967. Here was the old service bay, garage doors, and this was like the old lot, sales lot. Okay, so John Bowman worked here from the mid-30s, or he worked as an auto salesman from the mid-30s till about a year and a half before his death. Very successful at what he did. Okay, here is Immaculate Conception Church, where the Bowman family worshipped. This church was the only, well, I shouldn't say only, it was the primary Catholic church back in 1962. I guess it was the head of the diocese. I'm not Catholic, so I don't know all these little terms here. But yeah, it's where the Bowmans worship. This is where their funerals were held, and it was here that a priest, Father Vernon Rashke, he was called to the home on July 30th, 1962, to perform the last rites on the 4 members of the Bowman family. Over here is the old Catholic high school. This is where the 3 Bowman boys attended. This is before St. Thomas More was built. This is the high school here. Of course, now it looks wildly different from back then. Hey guys, before I take you to the house, I'm going to tell you the family history leading up to that weekend. So John and Alberta were married in 1937 in Belle-Fourche, and they soon moved to Rapid City, to an apartment on St. Joseph Street. John worked for Black Hills Oldsmobile Cadillac, as we already went over, and Alberta was a stay-at-home mom, as most moms were back then. Now, over the 40s and 50s, John's depression and anxiety worsened, and Alberta started drinking. They moved to the St. Charles house in the late 40s, early 50s. Despite trying to appear as a happy family, Alberta became a sharp-tongued alcoholic, and John was often absent from home. So, struggling with all that, with home and work problems, John began seeing other women. And he suffered a mental breakdown in 1951 and stayed at Mayo Clinic for 2 weeks.
Now, Bruce, the middle son, began drinking like his mom in his early teens. He had attended Cathedral High and then later Central High, but then eventually dropped out of school altogether. And he spent his days at home drinking and sleeping off hangovers, which didn't seem to mind to Alberta, because now she had a drinking companion. In 1959, Jack Bowman was arrested in Deadwood after a bar fight for cheating allegations. He called his mom for bail, but Alberta first had to track down her husband, who of course wasn't home, as usual. Suspecting that he was with another woman, she searched his usual motels and found him at the townhouse on St. Joe. She waited for him to come out and asked for bail money, and John's behavior was nothing new. She had long turned a blind eye to this. But this marked a turning point in their marriage, and John was hit with a wave of depression and guilt and feelings that had simmered beneath the surface for years. Caught between his wife and his own frustration and hopelessness and helplessness. So it was a little more than a year after that Deadwood incident that Alberta first felt signs of a brain aneurysm. It kept her in the hospital for nearly 2 months and nearly took her life. So a lot had changed in that year. And between Jack's arrest and John's blatant infidelity, they had decided to quietly separate. John had been out of work since the spring of 1960, and he was unable to keep up with the auto sales demands, and his anxiety and depression was weighing him down too much. So John would stay at the house most nights, but he'd more often than not end up in the basement to sleep. And Alberta kept unkind words about him to herself, around the boys and nearby neighbors. So Alberta's family member took her to the Mayo Clinic in December of 1960, and that's when it was discovered that she had the aneurysm. So surgery was set for January of 1961, so John had to stay home with the boys, and she was discharged home on February 3rd of 1961. So she'd been gone for nearly 2 months, and this had affected her family and her relationship with John even more. His work was sporadic at best, and she felt even more aggravated by the lack of income, as well as her own medical condition. Doctors had told her no more alcohol, but she didn't listen to that. She kept drinking. So there was all this added stress at home, and of course John had another mental breakdown in the spring of 1961. So he decided to go to Yankton State Hospital instead of Mayo Clinic this time. While there, he went through extensive therapy, and he was put on an antidepressant. So according to the hospital records, his mood gradually improved, and he became more relaxed, and he even gained weight. And he was discharged on August 2nd, 1961. While John was away for 4 months, Alberta never visited him. That was mostly at his request, but also due to her own needs and her own medical condition and her recovery. So when he was discharged from Yankton State Hospital, he didn't immediately return to Rapid City. He went back to Sioux Falls to follow up on some job leads. And he had at least 5 salesman opportunities, but did not believe that they paid enough. So he actually ended up working at a cemetery, selling burial plots. He got a small, cheap room rental at a house on East 4th Street there, and he would eventually get some part-time work at a car dealership. And Alberta was upset when she found out her husband was not coming right back, but part of her was relieved at the arguments that would be avoided. And it sounded like he could contribute at least some money to the family expenses. He didn't have much luck with the cemetery business, and not much luck with the auto salesman business. So he got a job selling life insurance at a Rapid City-based company in Yankton. Not long after that, he met a woman named Dolores. She had also been a former patient at Yankton State Hospital. After they'd been both released, John kept in touch with Dolores and eventually hired her to work in his insurance office, answering phones. And she and John would, after work, grab a drink and sometimes end up in his rented room at his apartment. Now, this time away from Alberta and having Dolores in his life, it had lifted his spirits enough to see potentially a positive future. But Alberta was still having health issues. When she returned to the Mayo Clinic in September for a 6-month surgery follow-up, doctors found a lesion had formed near the location of the aneurysm. So she complained of muscle nervousness and frequent headaches and vision getting worse, and she made several trips between Rapid City and the clinic, and a follow-up procedure was done that fall. Alberta made her last clinic visit in January of 1962 and received strict orders to avoid alcohol and stress and all that, which she could not follow for longer than 2 weeks, so she was back at it soon after. So Dolores and John were living together by this time in Yankton, and money was tight because of Alberta's health issues and John's sporadic work history. In February 1962, John learned that Alberta had taken out $6,000 from their savings account. John felt that all Alberta did was to call him and raise hell, and everything she tells him he's doing wrong, and he didn't know how to please her. So all this stress with his family and all these financial issues, and Alberta getting on him about just about everything, he went back to Yankton State Hospital on March 29th, 1962. Everything had turned around, and he felt like the hospital was the only place to get his feet back on the ground and get his head straight. But he couldn't but help to feel resentment towards Alberta, really a growing resentment. She kept spending too much, she kept drinking too much, and she kept nagging at him and criticizing whatever he did. John was diagnosed as having a return of depression, so he's put on 2 different antidepressants. And he had Dolores by his side, and he started feeling better. But in April 5th, Alberta called and basically told him she wanted to settle their marriage. She wanted to either divorce or try to repair it. But of course, this would mean also cutting ties with Dolores, and he didn't want to do that. So John never called Alberta back, and he told the hospital officials there that he did not want to see her. But a week later, she showed up with Bruce and Maury, and when they entered the room, Dolores happened to be there. So you can imagine how that went. She, this is your girlfriend, yeah. She snapped, and the boys, stood there awkwardly. And John barked back to Dolores, don't get mad at me. You drove me to find someone else. He also said, you need to be in here more than I do. Alberta asked him, why are you doing this? Why can't we just get back together and make it work? And John said, it's too late. I can't deal with your drinking, and I've already got Dolores here, and she's more concerned about me than you are. So Dolores awkwardly left the room and let John and Alberta alone to talk. They also knew that married or not, or separated or not, they had responsibilities to their home and family. Alberta was even more angry at John because he failed to live up to what she expected of him. And John was equally mad at himself for what he deemed a failure on his part. Alberta had felt that she took much of the brunt back in Rapid in front of the neighbors and friends who knew that she had to rent out their house for extra money, and that her husband was away in the state hospital, and that was very embarrassing to her. All this did to John was just create more and more resentment towards Alberta, and she would not understand or offer support for his emotional needs. So eventually Alberta left, and the couple had agreed on a permanent divorce,
but they didn't nail down any dates or even plans to begin the legal aspects of that. In Yankton, John's treatment continued for 3 more weeks, and his mood and his emotions vastly improved. And he told doctors from the moment Alberta left that he was feeling better and stronger, and Dolores's continued visits only boosted his morale. So John left Yankton State Hospital for the very last time on May 29, 1962. The doctors felt that he had improved remarkably, and he felt much better, and it was a lot more comfortable. He planned on remaining in Yankton and had been prescribed a continued antidepressant, and it was suggested he had regular outpatient psychiatric visits as needed with the local doctor, and his final discharge notes stated his prognosis as fair. As that would turn out, that was a bit more than optimistic. But just a few days later, after reality set in, his feelings of worry, despair, and the guilt returned, and once back in his small home with Dolores, he realized he still had limited income and a lot of responsibilities back in Rapid City. Since the insurance office was closed, he could no longer work there. That also left Dolores unemployed and eventually out of his life. And as for Alberta, coming to a final decision on their marriage was both a relief and a new uncertainty that drove her even further into drinking. She realized that the marriage had to end, but like a lot of women back then, she had no real income, and her sons needed support, and she considered this a humiliation in front of her neighbors and friends. So by late July 1962, John returned to Rapid City, but didn't immediately contact Alberta or his sons. He took a room at one of the old rooming houses where he had stayed in the past, and reached out to the Black Hills dealership again, seeking employment. Bosses said they were sympathetic, but they had nothing to offer him. And John slowly realized that he could not be in the sales game. Anyway, again, at least not the way he felt. So back there in Rapid, he finally turned to one of the people who had helped him in times of trouble for several years, and that was Father Richard Plant. And he offered John guidance and advice many times over the years, including the marital support. And John felt he would be the perfect one to help him see the light. So John reached out by phone to Richard Plant on July 27th, which was just 2 days before the murders, and asked to talk to him. Unfortunately, Plant could not meet with him and had to tell him he was busy that weekend and he was going out of town. And it's likely he did not discuss suicidal or murderous feelings, just a request to talk. So after he failed to reach Father Plant on July 27th, he returned to the room he had rented and tried to call Dolores. But when he called her number, he got nervous and did not speak when she came on the line, and after a minute, he just hung up. So he knew he couldn't really talk to Alberta, and now he couldn't talk to Dolores about what he was feeling. So instead, he called his brother Bob, who lived in Hot Springs. So John poured out his heart to his brother Bob, and Bob listened, but his response was not what John wanted to hear. He just basically told him to man up and get a grip. So he picked up the phone again and he called Alberta's number because he wanted to see when he could come over to discuss the future and get some decisions made about their marriage. So Alberta picked up the line and she sounded slightly soused and slightly aggravated. And when John asked to come over that night, she balked and told him she was busy with their older son Jack packing for college. He's leaving in the next day for college in Minnesota. And she had other errands to do for him. But she agreed to let him come over on Saturday afternoon. So the next day, before going over to the house, John went for a long drive in the Black Hills. He then came back to Rapid City, back to his rooming house, and lay down on the bed and closed his eyes, and just his mind was just a roller coaster of emotions, just thinking of what was going on in his life with frustration, anger, sadness, and heaviness like never before. In one hand, he was feeling freer because he and Alberta had agreed to split up. And another way he felt was guilt because
he was breaking up his family and had no way to earn the money he needed to support his sons the way he felt he must. So it was about 2 p.m. when he finally decided to get up again and head on over to the house at 304 St. Charles Street. So now we come to Sunday, July 29th, 1962. And I will be taking you to 3rd Street and St. Charles Street, the intersection there where their house stands today. And I will be telling you the rest of the story of that very tragic day.
We are here in Old Robbinsdale today. And right across the street there is the old Bowman family home. Now we left off on Saturday, July 28th. John pulled up to the house there, rang the doorbell. His eldest son, Jack, answered the door. He had suitcase and duffel bag on the floor. He was ready to fly back to college in Minnesota that evening. John offered to drive him to the airport, and at the curb he told Jack to have a safe flight and be careful. And that was the last time that Jack ever saw his father. So John returned to the house here. This time he saw Alberta in the window, and this time the door was unlocked. They sat at the kitchen table and discussed their marriage. John asked if she was ready to end things or work to fix them, and Alberta brought up his infidelity. John defended himself and urged her to get help for her drinking, and Alberta shot back that she wouldn't drink so much if he did more to make her happy. John got upset, screeched, and slammed his fists on the table, and he sank back into his chair, head in his hands. When he looked up, his face was red and damp with sweat. He knew Alberta would never understand or change. So he's overwhelmed, and he walked out the front door. He circled the block here. Got back in his car and drove to the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception, where I took you the other day. So he sat there in the cathedral praying and trying to make sense of it all. And afterward, he drove aimlessly for about 15 minutes before returning to the house here. This time, his son Maury answered the door. In the dining room, John saw Alberta, and she was making dinner with Bruce helping. And he was surprised to find two brothers, Tom and John Fay, staying the night in the basement. Both said that they were exhausted, and so they headed to bed down in the basement. John sensed Alberta didn't want him to stay, but the boys wanted him to and encouraged him, so she agreed. After dinner, they watched TV while Alberta cleaned up in the kitchen, and by 10, everyone turned in for the night, planning to attend church with the Fay brothers in the morning. So that brings us to the morning of July 29th, 1962. And the Fay brothers were downstairs sleeping, and one of them heard what he thought sounded like two distinct thumps. Just a bump bump kind of noise, like something had dropped on the floor, like a heavy ashtray or something. So didn't think much of it, but they noticed the time. They said, oh well, we need to get to mass, so let's go wake up Maury and Bruce. So they went upstairs, and it was eerily quiet. Nobody was stirring. There was no sound at all. And so they went first into Bruce's room. And Bruce was covered up with a blanket, but he appeared not to be asleep. But yet again, he did appear to be asleep, if that makes sense. So I can't remember which Fay brother, maybe it was Tom, but he went up to Bruce and he said, "Hey Tom, hey Bruce, it's time to get up for church." And of course Bruce didn't respond, and he was shaking him, and then he just noticed that something was way off. And that's when he noticed underneath Bruce's chin a small bullet hole with a little bit of blood seeping out. And of course he went into shock. He couldn't believe what was happening, and that's when his brother ran in, because he had found Maury the same way, except Maury hadn't died as peacefully as Bruce, because his bedclothes and the walls were splattered with blood. He's obviously dead. So of course they freaked out, jumped in their car here. It was parked along St. Charles, right here by that hydrant, and raced down to the police station. They didn't have 911 in those days. So the old police station is now what is the Mission homeless shelter. That's where they went, told the cops what they found. And one thing is, they thought John Bowman wasn't home. They didn't know where John Bowman was. They didn't see his body. They only saw Alberta lying by her bedroom door, by the bed, between the door and the bed. So they didn't know where John was, because they didn't see his body. They didn't know if there was a perpetrator that had come in the night and done this, or what. So that is what happened there. Police went over, of course. Father Vernon Raschke was called to perform the last rites on the bodies. And of course everybody was traumatized. This doesn't happen in Rapid City. I should say it's more common now. If you our crime rate has skyrocketed since 1962, but back then this was just a close-knit community, very much smaller than it is now. So it was later surmised that this is what happened after John went to sleep on the couch the night before. He woke up, and all the problems and all the issues and all his mental illness, it came rushing back. He knew that Alberta was never going to see the light, and he had grown to hate her. So he knew, well, he figured that the only way to solve this problem was to get rid of her. And what would he do about the boys? Because the boys would be without their parents. So they had to go too. So he went into the closet. Actually, he went to Maury's room. Now Maury had a .22 caliber pump Winchester rifle that he had given Jack, that John had given Jack for his 15th birthday, and then Jack had given it to his brothers. So he spotted that rifle in Maury's room. And he looked in the chamber and everything. He only had one bullet, so he knew he had to go get more bullets. So he went to the closet and loaded the shotgun. And he went to Bruce's room, because Bruce's room was first, apparently. It was on the first room we came to in the hallway. And he sat there for a moment, contemplating, crying, but he figured he had to do this. So he went right up to Bruce, put the gun underneath his chin, pulled the trigger, and it was so quiet because the bullet didn't exit. It was just lodged in his brain. So he went back to Alberta's room to make sure she hadn't heard anything. She seemed to be asleep still. So he went back to Maury's room. And this time he stood from about 15 feet away from in the doorway. And he took the shot and hit Maury right in the head. And this startled Maury awake. Of course, it did not kill him instantly. So Maury thrashed around in his bed for a good moment. And then John fired a fatal bullet into the back of his head. So this extra noise that John made taking care of Maury, this awakened Alberta. And she was at their door in the bedroom, and she says, "John, what the hell are you doing?" And John didn't answer, and he pulled the gun and he shot her in the chest. Now it hit her lungs, of course, and she wouldn't have been able to scream out or say much of anything after that. And then he let her have it again, and this time it went in her head. So he only had one bullet left after Alberta was gone. So he laid down by the side of his bed and closed his eyes, reached up with his arms, pointed the shotgun at him, and pulled the trigger. And that was the end of John Bowman. We'll never know exactly what was going through John's mind that day, but what we do know is this: he was a man battling inner demons, depression, anxiety, and possibly years of unresolved mental illness. In an era when mental health was buried under stigma and help was often out of reach, the silent suffering can become overwhelming. And sometimes that pain turns inward. Other times, it turns tragically outward. Now, we can't change what happened, but we can choose to listen, to talk, and to see the signs before it's too late. May they rest in peace, and may their story remind us to care for one another while we still can. Thanks for watching.